Sound is just such an important part of the human experience. And to not have it is one thing, but to be given it is another.
You're listening to I Teach Overseas podcast with your host, Daniel Mendez.
Welcome to the I Teach Overseas podcast. Whether you're currently teaching overseas or considering the idea, my mission for this podcast is to celebrate, educate, and entertain our international community. Join me as we discuss current issues and trends in international schools, as well as meet some amazing people from around the world. My guest today is Dawn Doig, who spent 23 years as an audiologist working in places such as Vietnam, UK, Kuwait, and even Saudi Arabia. Recently, Dawn earned her EAL certification through the College of New Jersey and has been an EAL teacher for the last 4 years at the International School of Ulaanbaatar. Before we begin the interview, here's the episode's I Teach Overseas tip. Did you know your passport must be valid longer than your travel stay? In fact, there are some countries that require your passport to be valid for 6 months beyond your intended return date. To prevent you being denied entry, go to your digital calendar of choice, create a calendar event on the day of expiry with a reminder message 6 months from the date of expiry. If your calendar doesn't allow for reminders, then place your calendar event as a 6-month warning. If you have an I Teach Overseas tip to share on this show, go to iteachoverseas.com or send me an email at info@iteachoverseas.com. Dawn is a passionate writer and has published 5 picture books that we will learn more about during this podcast. Dawn, thank you for being on the I Teach Overseas podcast.
Thank you.
So, Dawn, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you became passionate about audiology.
Whole interest in audiology started when I was a young child. My father was an orphan, and so he was actually in and out of the orphanage in New Westminster in British Columbia. And there was one special family, every time they heard that he was in the orphanage, they would go and get him and bring him home. He ended up having a foster family off and on throughout his youth. She ended up being our grandma. We called her our grandma. But she had 3 children who were born deaf, and they married deaf spouses, and they had hearing children. So when we would go to visit and we would see them there, I would watch these young children who couldn't even really talk yet, but they would be signing with their mom and dad. And that really intrigued me, that here were these people who couldn't hear, and yet they were communicating with their children. So I was interested in audiology from that young age, but I had no idea how to get into it. So I actually started off doing a degree in English, but my sister was going to go to the University of British Columbia. So one day I was looking through her calendar for UBC, and I came across the Department of Human Communication Disorders and realized that that is how you get into audiology. So in my 3rd year at UVic, I dropped all of my German courses and picked up physics and calculus and biology and started to do a Bachelor of Science in Linguistics, which would give me all the prerequisites that I would need to go into audiology. And then the summer of 1997, I ended up going to Vietnam on a humanitarian trip. It was actually my first time out of Canada, but one of the most amazing experiences in my career as an audiologist. It was very similar to Doctors Without Borders. I remember driving up in the van to this school for the deaf in Lai Tu, and all these little children came running out to greet us. And then when I was sitting in my room setting up the equipment, I still remember these little faces up against the window, watching, just waiting their turn. And I don't know, it's just the nuns who were there at the orphanage, the amount of love they had for these kids, the amount of energy they put into helping these children was, it was just amazing. It was really quite incredible. And I have never forgotten that trip. I've carried it throughout my career as an audiologist.
And you know what? I feel like all international teachers have that one experience of traveling overseas, and it just stays with them and they want to seek more. Was it that experience that made you want to go overseas?
It was that experience that led us to heading overseas, actually, yes. I was only in Vietnam for 10 days. And, basically we took body hearing aids off of children and put ear level hearing aids on them. And I still remember this father who had come 200 kilometers with his daughter. He actually picked up Bob Karkner, who was the man who spearheaded the entire trip, gave him a hug and spun him around. He was so happy for his daughter. When the posting came up for the Kuwait Dalhousie project again, which was just shortly after that trip, we looked at it again and we thought, you know what, this is a sign. And I knew that the project was going to be for another 2.5 years. So I thought, wow, look at what we accomplished in 10 days in Vietnam. Imagine what we can do in 2.5 years in Kuwait. So off we went. It was definitely a time where you had to be very much aware of what was going on around you. We had to have a carry-on packed in the closet, ready to go at a moment's notice with 1,000 American dollars packed away in it in case we had to be evacuated.
And so that's where you actually met a very special girl, Divya.
Yes.
And so tell me a little bit about that experience, that story.
Well, Divya came in to see me with her mom and dad. The family is from India. She presented with a profound hearing loss, so she was not able to hear anything that was going to help her learn to speak with the hearing aids that she had. She would actually come in, and when I would try to test her, she'd have the headphones on her ears, and she would try to move them off her ears by lifting up her shoulders and pushing up on them. Parents were very frustrated. They told me straight out that God had made a mistake, that their daughter should not have been born hearing impaired, and they were just waiting for her to get her hearing back. I tried to encourage them to teach her some sign language so that she could try and communicate. I said, everything I've seen, the way she behaves, the things she does, she's a very intelligent little girl. She just can't hear. Father was resistant. And I said, while you're waiting for your miracle to happen, your daughter cannot communicate. She can't tell you if she's unhappy. She can't tell you if she's hungry other than through some gestures, but she can't tell you what she would like to eat. Again, I encourage them that this is something I feel would really help you and the family. Mom was so frustrated. She would actually take her skin between her thumb and her index finger and pinch it if she was acting up, because she couldn't tell her to behave, right? She couldn't hear the words to understand that. So after talking to the parents a few times, I actually presented the dad with the book, Deaf Like Me. The day I gave the father the book to read the one day, the next day he came in to see me and he said, I could not put that book down. I read it all night. And he said, I want you to teach her sign language. So I didn't actually teach her sign language, but I had her come with her mother and I taught Mom the signs, but she was there watching us. And I still remember her coming in and the pictures would be on my desk and right away she would walk over to the pictures and she'd try to copy them with her hands. And this little 3-year-old girl, within a week, she knew all her colors. She was identifying objects. It was just so powerful. And her behavioral problems virtually disappeared overnight.
Wow.
The tantrums weren't happening the way they had. And Divya is now 20 years old. They moved to the United Arab Emirates when she was around 5. She got a cochlear implant. She was mainstreamed in a normal school, and she's now attending university.
That is an amazing story that you've been a part of. Was that the reason why you were compelled to write this book?
Well, it wasn't just Divya, but all of the children that up to that point that I had had the opportunity to work with. These are, they're very special children. Unfortunately, have been born with a hearing loss for whatever reason. But when you put those hearing aids on, or when I was in Saudi Arabia, I worked with quite a few deaf children, and just to watch these little faces when they hear that first sound, or they hear their mom or dad's voice for the first time, or, it's, I don't know, it's really hard to describe that.
No, you've given them a gift.
Sound is just such an important part of the human experience, and to not have it is one thing, but to be given it is another. And it's just, people ask me if I miss audiology. Definitely. I mean, it'll always be a part of who I am. And that's why I actually started a hearing screening program at the school here in Ulaanbaatar. It's the only school in the country that has a hearing screening program, because I do feel like I need to keep my fingers in it, because it is really rewarding. I'm still working with children, and every day I have kind of that wow again, as they learn a new word, or they finally understand a concept, or, it's different, but it's still extremely rewarding.
This is Shalene Huth from the Anglo-American School of Moscow, and you're listening to I Teach Overseas podcast.
Your first picture book, And So Ahmed Hears, was published by Widex Canada to help improve public awareness about childhood hearing loss. Tell us about it. It's no longer available, but you have some good news, right?
Last year, I emailed them and said, a lot of people have been asking me where they can get a copy of the book, but it's not available for purchase. It's not available internationally. Would it be possible for me to find a publisher to republish it? And then it can be made available to those who would like a copy. And they said certainly. So they released the artwork to me. So I now have the artwork, and fortunately found a publisher this past year who was interested in it and took it on.
In the meantime, you continue to write stories and have published a few more books. Tell us about the latest one that you've published.
It's called What a Bath, and it's actually illustrated with my cartoon character, Big Shoe Bear. I started drawing Big Shoe Bears when I was 12 years old. My friends and family all know Big Shoe Bears. I made lots of things with them when I was a child: dolls, pictures, ornaments, you name it, and did lots of drawing with it. But it wasn't until, my son was little, he was in the bathtub, and he said, "Mommy, what happens when you go down the drain?" And What a Bath was born.
Oh, that's awesome. Where do you get your passion for writing these picture books? Where is that coming from?
Actually, my writing didn't start off as picture books. I've been writing since I was young. I actually had a school days book when I was a child. My mom bought each of us one to keep all of your memorabilia in it. And for several years in a row, it says, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And I wrote a cartoonist and an author, or a cartoonist and a writer. What a Bath was all hand-drawn and colored with pencil crayons, and both books have all movable parts. So the kids loved sitting and having those books read to them, and they could move things around. So it was quite interactive, and it's a really special memory for me because I had written the books and the kids really enjoyed them. My next book is about children learning English as a second language. I'm really excited about that one coming out. Can't wait to see the illustrations and have it on the bookshelves. So that's the next one. And it was also inspired by the children here in Mongolia. This has been a great place for inspiration for books.
Why is that? Why is that?
I've written 5 since I've been here. So 3 of them have already been published. So it's really neat. Petra Pencil Pines for Pizza actually was inspired by a little boy I worked with last year in grade 1 who had difficulty with just the whole process of writing, holding a pencil. So that book was inspired by him. So it's really neat to see it with the illustrations. And so this place has been a great place for inspiration.
It sounds like your books have a challenge and how they've overcome it.
You're right. A lot of them, I hadn't really thought about that because my books don't have like a theme that you can say, oh, they're always about this or Petra pencil. But a bath wouldn't have been. Waddy and the Worry Wakes is also, it's about a warthog who worries all the time about his friends. And right, they do have some kind of challenge. But that's really what life is full of, isn't it? We always have some kind of challenge. We're faced with challenges regularly, aren't we?
With your experience in audiology, you must bring a different approach to your teaching practice. Can you tell us about that?
I approached the head of primary about starting a hearing screening program here. I felt because we do have pre-K children, so our school starts with 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds. One of the signs of hearing loss is a child who is generally well-behaved, seems to be listening well, suddenly is acting out, is doing things that they normally wouldn't do, and often that can be because they're not hearing. So we have a long winter here in Ulaanbaatar, and children are prone to upper respiratory infections, which also lead to middle ear problems, so fluid in the ears. So I thought it would be a good idea to have some way of checking these kids on site, and then teachers could be informed that, oh, you know what? Bold isn't hearing very well today. So you're going to need to check with him that he's understood that, what he needs to do. Make sure that you're not talking to him from across the room because he's not going to be able to hear you. Another one is a lot of teachers, especially teachers who are working with children who are learning English as a second or additional language, they're not aware that these kids are functioning very similar to a child with a mild hearing loss. And a mild permanent hearing loss or a mild hearing loss from fluid. So these kids, if we have a child with a mild hearing loss who was born with that, what do we do for them? We put hearing aids on them. We give the teacher an FM system so the teacher's voice is right in the child's ears. We make sure that they're sitting as close to the speaker as possible. We make sure that there's no extraneous noises like the air conditioning blowing to interfere with their hearing or heater noise. We try to keep it quiet so that when we're having a group discussion, there's not lots of paper rattling. But what do we do for our EAL kids? Generally, they're sitting among the rest of the kids, right? And they're trying to hear. We're not always aware of the difficulties that they may be having that are above and beyond just the language. And when a child has a hearing loss, we're aware of the amount of energy that goes into listening, trying to hear. It's the same kind of energy and, for a child who doesn't speak the language. So by the end of the day, they're exhausted. And you may have other variables. You may have a teacher, like at our school, we have teachers who are from Australia. We have teachers who are from New Zealand. We have our Mongolian educational assistants. So they're listening to all these different accents, and the words aren't always pronounced the same either. We had a discussion today about eczema versus eczema, things like that. So just the pronunciation is not always the same. For a child with a hearing loss, again, we're aware that when they have fluid, things are going to sound different than when their ears are clear. Or if they're not wearing their hearing aids, things are going to sound different than when they are. So it's the same for a child who's learning a different language. If suddenly somebody's speaking to them with a different accent or they're pronouncing a word a different way, they may not necessarily understand what's being said. Because I have that background, I do watch for those things and I try to educate my colleagues about some of those things.
What are some tips you could give our listeners that they could implement right away?
A lot of our classrooms will have a small area that's carpeted, and teachers do tend to do a lot of the group discussion kind of things there. That's good, but keeping away some of the other things. So if kids are flapping paper around, try to keep the papers on the floor. Something as easy as providing the student with a buddy that they can go and ask, I missed what was said. Could you tell me what we need to do now? Or even the teacher, once the kids are all busy doing what they need to do, just going over and having a little check to make sure that child understood what they needed to do. I mean, sometimes it can look like they're just not doing it, right? They don't want to do it. They don't want to participate. They're not interested. but it can go beyond that. It can be that they just really don't understand what they were supposed to do. In the international schools, there's probably a greater awareness of some of those things because teachers are used to working with kids from different cultures and with kids with different languages. And I think there's becoming a greater awareness, even like in the United States, Canada, the UK, where there's a lot of people moving around now, right? But those would be the best things. Or does the child seem really off today? How are they feeling? Is there a chance that they do have a cold and there may be some fluid in their ears? So checking with them, how are you listening today? Were you able to hear everything okay? And that issue with middle ear goes right up to age 8. Easily. I mean, it's more frequent usually in the younger kids, but children are still getting these middle ear things and middle ear infections when they're in grade 2 and 3.
One of the things that I didn't understand until I became a parent was an ear infection can actually hinder their speech.
Oh, sure.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
That's one of the main reasons for children actually being in speech therapy. And it's more common in boys. They don't really know why, but boys tend to get more of these middle ear things going on. And yeah, so you generally see more boys in speech therapy. The reason is, imagine if you plug your ears with both fingers, so it's like your head is underwater. Imagine trying to hear and understand what everybody's saying when everything's muffled like that. For several weeks, maybe everything's muffled. Then you've had a treatment or the ears have cleared on their own and now everything's nice and clear. But what people are saying to you doesn't sound the same as the way it sounded when your ears were muffled. You're trying to learn how to say a word, but it doesn't always sound the same.
Right.
You're trying to learn how to pronounce a word. But how do you do that when it doesn't always sound the same coming out of somebody's mouth? The words just don't always sound the same. So how do you learn how to say it right? Which is the right way to say it? If it's a more significant hearing loss than that, then there are certain sounds that children just can't hear at all. So, if a child is born with a hearing loss in the high frequencies, for example, they won't hear necessarily a s or z. They just can't hear them. It's beyond what their peripheral hearing is actually capable of picking up. There's a variety of reasons for it, whether it's middle ear, whether it's a permanent type of hearing loss. So anytime children have any impairment with their speech, the first thing you do is check their hearing. That also goes for children who have reading difficulties. And again, a lot of people don't realize the link. But if you can't hear the word properly, how are you going to be able to read it?
That's true.
You need to be able to make that connection between the letters and what sounds those letters make. So if you can't hear the sound that letter makes, how are you going to be able to read that word? So again, as an audiologist, I had many, many children referred to me to have their hearing checked because they were having difficulties learning how to read.
Unfortunately, your brother had a terrible accident. Could you tell us more about his condition and why you started a GoFundMe campaign?
His name is Shaun. He's actually 11 months older than me. He was a very intelligent man. He was actually a systems engineer. Did a lot of traveling actually with his job. Has 2 lovely children. But 5.5 years ago, he was in the car and I actually don't know all the details of the accident. He was with a friend and the car hit a pole and he was ejected 15 feet out the back window.
Oh my.
Landed on his head, suffered severe head injury. He was actually in a coma for a little while. They had to open up his skull to relieve pressure on his brain. And he's been in a fairly vegetative state since then. He looks at you, he watches you. The first time that I went to see him, he actually wrote "Hello, Dawn" on a little whiteboard. And I guess the saddest part of this whole story, apart from what's happened to Shaun, is the impact that it's had on my mother. She's elderly. She's going to be 75 this year. He was her firstborn, and she spends pretty much every day at his bedside. I guess it's the amount of grief that she's going through. And I don't think she's ever been able to fully grieve because he's still here. And she goes there every day. She's convinced that he's in there. She uses pictures to ask him to point to people, and she'll ask him yes/no questions. She's adamant that he can do that every time that she does it with him, but she's just so full of so much hope that he will come out of this shell, so to speak, and communicate with her. It's heartbreaking to watch. And I think it's really hard for people to understand what she's going through. She also has a hard time understanding that people grieve in different ways. And she gets very upset that people don't spend the same amount of hours going to visit him that she does. But I know it's really difficult for me to see him like that. And it's really incredibly hard for his nieces and nephews and even his children to see him like that. I actually wrote the book, Go Away, Shaun, hoping that it would somehow help her to go through a bit of the grieving process a bit more. One thing I probably need to share, he could actually be quite nasty. But through the book, I wanted people to remember the good side of him as well. He was a wonderful uncle to my children, to my sister's children. And I think people need to get past maybe some of the things he did that weren't so nice and remember the things that he did that were nice. I know for myself that you need to get past that and learn to forgive. And I think that's probably the biggest message through my book, is that within this person was also a good person, and there are people who miss him.
Thank you for that. One of the things that I carry with me is that everybody in this world is going through something. If we all thought that before we acted on someone's behavior, it might help us to give a little bit more compassion. I thank you for sharing that.
Well, and we don't always know the reasons why someone acts the way they do or the reason they do the things they do either, right? But all I know is that even though there were some really rough times with him, there were also some really good ones. And I think sometimes people dwell too much on the bad ones and they don't think enough about the good ones. I actually use a metaphor of patches in my book, that he has patches on his jeans, and those patches were the good things. But I was hoping through this that maybe my mom would get a little bit of, what's the word I'm looking for?
Celebrate his life?
I think so. And just realize that, yes, maybe who don't want to see him or whatever because they can't let go of bad things, but there are also people who remember the good things, and the book actually ends with me saying, because the book is called Go Away, Shaun, and it ends, come back, Shaun, I whisper, come back.
Where can people get your books?
They're actually available through Amazon.com, Amazon CA. I believe they're on Amazon UK now as well. And they're also available directly from Pennet Publications, which is in the United States.
What I'll do is I'll link them all up in the show notes for everybody. You've actually started a GoFundMe campaign for your brother. Can you tell us a little bit about what the fund is for?
Well, my mother actually approached me about starting this campaign. She really is just hoping so much that my brother will speak to her again, whether it's through a communications means like this eye gaze, eye tracking device. Personally, as an audiologist, I know firsthand how important communication is and how isolated people feel when their communication is restricted or severely impaired. As educators, I think we also all know how important communication is, right? It's an essential part of what we do every day with the students we're working with. Just looking at my mom, the whole situation, I thought it's worth trying. If it doesn't work, I'm sure there's another individual in the home where he lives that can probably benefit from it. Somebody will be able to use it. I've been in touch with the eye gaze company themselves to find out more about it and whether it would actually be something that would work with my brother. My mom had actually watched a documentary or something about a lady who had been in a similar kind of accident with massive head injuries, and she hadn't spoken in 20 years. And they used this device with her, and she spoke to her mom for the first time in 20 years. Of course, that got my mom really excited. To Divya's parents, when they were thinking, no, we're not going to do sign language. There's going to be a miracle and she's going to get her hearing back. While you're waiting for your miracle, your daughter can't communicate. And while we're waiting to try this, Shaun can't communicate. So I always think, if there's some hope, and my mother has an incredible amount of hope that something's going to happen, and he'll be able to say something, or at least be able to communicate how he's feeling through this device. It's worth giving it a shot.
Thank you for that. And I will put the link in the show notes as well. And hopefully there will be others that are moved by your story and find enough funds for this wonderful device. Well, thank you very, very much for being on the I Teach Overseas podcast. I really enjoyed having you and listening to your story, and I hope our listeners connect with you and want to read your books. Hopefully they got a lot from what you said about how important the hearing is in both speaking, learning a language, reading. Thank you so much for being on the I Teach Overseas podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Daniel. This has been one of those new experiences. I certainly haven't gone through something like this before, and certainly not as a newly published author. I really appreciate that you were interested in my books and speaking with me about them.